All right, this is the Big Douglas Show. Rapper Big Pooh is in the co-host seat, and our guest today is Tom Pelissaro from the NFL Network. Thanks, Tom, for doing this with us today.
You got it, guys. How you doing?
Doing well.
Good,
We
good.
On Fridays we always play the birthday game. We'll get started on that now. Before we do that, though, real quick, yesterday for me and my wife, 15 years of marriage. So good on her
Congratulations.
for putting up with me for that long. She deserves some sort of award or medal. All right. It is James Franco has a birthday this week. How old do you think James Franco is?
45.
I'm gonna go like 42.
James Franco's 43 this week. 43.
What's the difference? Closest to the pin for Big Pooh.
Marshawn Lynch has a birthday this week. Marshawn.
Oh, he's man, I thought I knew this. 35.
I think you're right. I think he is 35.
It is 35. You gotta love Marshawn. Did you see the interview he did the other day with Fauci? Maybe only Snoop Dogg's been allowed to be more like just themselves than Marshawn. You gotta love to see it. Let's Suge Knight's got a birthday this week. How do you think Suge Knight is?
Oh, Suge Knight is at least 52.
I'm gonna say 57.
Close. 56 for Suge Knight. 56.
Go.
And we'll close out with Tony Romo. Tony Romo has a birthday this week.
35, about 37.
Tony Romo, I think, was the 03 NFL draft. So that'd make him about 39.
41.
41.
For Tony.
Wow.
41. And also, just to make you feel good about yourself, the movie Shrek turns 20 today.
Does
Shrek
not
came
make me
out
feel
20.
good about myself at all.
So there's that. All right, Tom, I mean, it's draft week coming up, so that's what we're here for. Please tell me San Francisco didn't trade all those picks to go up and take Mac Jones third. I mean, is that what happened?
I mean, it's definitely the strongest possibility talking to other people within the league. Certainly, they've been connected with Mac Jones from the start when they traded those picks. Now, I have had multiple well-connected individuals tell me over the past couple of days it's too soon to rule out Trey Lance from North Dakota State with that pick as well. The thing with Mac Jones, as much as, he doesn't look the same with his shirt off as Trey Lance or Justin Fields, he doesn't have the chiseled physique. He's not going to have great testing numbers, but he has two traits that Kyle Shanahan really values, which is quick processing and accuracy. You saw both those things at Alabama a year ago. That offense is all about scheming people open, knowing where the football needs to go. Those are things that Mac Jones can do. I mean, I've had multiple people in the league tell me when they watch his tape, it's like Joe Burrow light, in terms of Joe Burrow wasn't the best athlete. He didn't have the biggest arm, but he could see it. He could rip it. He was accurate with the football, obviously put up huge numbers at LSU with a bunch of good players around him, much like Mac Jones put up big numbers last year with really good players around him at Alabama. I'm not saying it's the same guy, but they do have some of the same traits. And when you know what Kyle Shanahan values from a quarterback perspective, it does make sense, even though objectively speaking, Mac Jones does not have as high of a ceiling athletically as Justin Fields or Trey Lance.
Tom, I'm interested to know what's really going on with Fields, with Justin Fields. Is it a team that really likes him, so they're putting out these stories, or will teams regret that they passed up on Fields, 2-3 years from now?
I mean, it's definitely possible that people will regret passing up on Justin Fields. I don't believe, and based on all my conversations with, probably most teams in the NFL, I don't believe that there's an agenda at play here. You just have some things that really trace with Justin Fields back to how it ended for him at Georgia. He goes there as a 5-star recruit, thinks he's going to walk in and get the job. Instead, Georgia stuck with the much less talented Jake Fromm. And, Fields chose to leave. He transferred to Ohio State, obviously had 2 monster seasons at Ohio State, but that definitely raised just some flags to, especially the scouts who've been tracking this from the start, just questioning, when he hits adversity, how's he going to react? Because in the NFL, you can't just decide I'm going to transfer and go someplace else if things don't go my way. Now, having said that, coaches really like Justin Fields. Coaches like him more than scouts do, because when they put on the tape with Justin Fields, they see all the traits that he does bring to the table physically. I mean, he's got a big arm. He is accurate down the field. He obviously, athletically, he can run. He can challenge you with his feet, with his, things that Mac Jones is not going to be able to do. From a leadership perspective, that was another question on Justin Fields, because in 2019, the word out of Ohio State was he came in, just was focused on winning the job, really didn't, try to get to know his teammates, wasn't necessarily relatable, but that kind of flipped around in 2020. I mean, he was out there, started the petition, took on a leadership role in terms of, pushing the Big Ten to reinstate fall football. So that's definitely something that comes up that people like. We also reported something earlier this week that teams became aware that Justin Fields manages epilepsy. It's not something that has impacted him during his NFL career. He takes medication for it. As long as he takes his medication, he's not had any issues. And, there's had other members of his family who have had epilepsy, and they've kind of outgrown it as they've gotten older. But every team, physician is going to just have to go, okay, know what the plan is, know what the medication is, know if you were to have a concussion, if you were to play at altitude, if you were to get dehydrated, how would you deal with that? All of which is to say, there's a lot of things to like about Justin Fields. It would be one thing if the people at Ohio State were telling NFL teams, hey, be wary of this guy. No, Ryan Day and those guys stand on the table for Justin Fields and say, if you want one guy leading your team on Sunday, it's this guy. And again, coaches really like the guy. It's some of those things really going back 3 years ago to Georgia that just have stuck with scouts in terms of the overall picture with Justin Fields. I would still believe, based on everything that I know, that he's gone in the first half of the first round, regardless of what happens in those first few picks.
It's interesting, Tom, that you bring that up, because I've asked that question before. Anybody that follows this show knows I'm a Georgia homer. And do you think his stock remains higher? Because I mean, it was him and Lawrence since they were juniors in high school that were supposed to be 1 and 2 in the draft, right? If he stays at Georgia and puts up the same numbers and has the same success, we're still having this conversation about where he goes. Whereas he the number 2 pick in the draft? Because I appreciate Wilson, but I'm just stunned that it's like a no-brainer that he's the second best quarterback in his class.
It's a really good question. It's one of those, hypotheticals that you can't really answer. And listen, Jake Fromm is, he's a guy who athletically is, almost below the line for what NFL teams are willing to draft. I think he went in the 5th round last year to Buffalo. Justin Fields had worked at, camps with Jake Fromm. He knew who he was competing against. He knows I'm more talented than this guy. The coaches go with the guy who just simply, he knew the offense. He'd been in it for several years. They knew that they could trust him. They thought that gave him the best chance to win. Yeah. I mean, if he stays there, who knows how things play out. But I also think it would be hard for Justin Fields to do more than he did at Ohio State. I mean, I think his record was 20-2 in 2 seasons as the starter. Bonkers numbers. He beats Trevor Lawrence in a college football playoff game last year. It's one of those, I certainly understand when people look at it and go, what more can Justin Fields possibly do? But the reality of it is teams are always, when, people are scouting, they're looking for what are the traits they're going to translate to the NFL. Athletically, the arm, all those things add up with Justin Fields, but he comes from an offense where historically the coaching staff really limits what the quarterback has to read, because they just want those guys to play fast. That's not to say that Justin Fields doesn't have the aptitude to do it. And in fact, I've spoken to some coaches who spent time on Zoom, because you can't do in-person meetings this year. I've spent time on Zoom with Justin Fields, who have told me, do you see it on tape? Not really. But do I think he can do it? Yes. Based on my conversations, yes. And again, the people at Ohio State vouch for him on that front too. It's just, you're making some kind of a bet with all these guys. Justin Fields is certainly one of them. And somebody sooner than later in this draft is going to make a bet on Trey Lance that it's fair to say is a much bigger bet, because you don't have some of the leadership questions with Trey Lance. You do have some of the processing questions, but he plays in a more pro style offense in North Dakota State. The difference there is he's played 17 games, and probably the best team that he ever faced was James Madison. I mean, this is not, you're going up against NFL players on a week in, week out basis. That's one of the things that's challenging every year for NFL teams. It's kind of the fun thing to get to the bottom of things, because I think sometimes we default to the easy answers of, work ethic and things that came with Justin Fields. It's not a work ethic issue. It's you watch the tape, you're looking for certain things. He checks all these boxes. There's other boxes he doesn't check, and you got to figure out when he gets to the NFL, can he do those things?
Tom, I'm interested. Before we got on, I was perusing online, and as I always do, and I saw a nifty little rumor out there about Green Bay and Jordan Love.
This the photo of somebody left their folder on a desk?
No. This is the one where Jordan Love is rumored to be on the move, a la Jimmy Garoppolo style. I'm interested. Have you heard any rumblings about? Because about 2 weeks ago, it was Aaron Rodgers might not be long for Green Bay. Now I'm seeing rumors of Jordan Love possibly is on the move out of Green Bay. Have you heard any of these rumblings?
I would always say this: anything is possible, especially if teams that need a quarterback swing and miss at the quarterbacks that they may have been targeting in the draft. The challenging thing for the Packers to trade Jordan Love is they traded up in the first round to get him a year ago. Are you going to have a team that's willing to give you a first round pick to at least make you even? And remember everything they went through with the Jordan Love pick, the criticism, all the questions that raised with Aaron Rodgers. If after 1 year of that, and listen, we don't get to see practice during the regular season. We didn't even see preseason because there wasn't one a year ago. We got no tape in the NFL on Jordan Love, but unless it was just a disaster in practice, it's hard to imagine that you're going to pull the ripcord in 1 year. Having said that, Aaron Rodgers was the NFL MVP a year ago. He's playing at a really high level. There's been a lot made of Aaron Rodgers' contract. Bottom line there is the Packers are open to doing a new deal with him, even if it comes during the regular season. They want to redo Devonta Adams' contract as well, but they've got Rodgers under contract for another 3 years. Historically, they have not jumped out ahead of the curve to extend players with that much time remaining on their contracts. If they wanted to, there was something out there about, it's holding up them from making free agent moves. There's automatic conversion language in Aaron Rodgers' contract. They could have done that without asking him and created cap space. They didn't do it. They didn't feel like they needed, to take that step. But, I don't think that bears on Jordan Love, especially when you remember the general manager of the Green Bay Packers is Brian Gutekunst. He trained under Ted Thompson, who trained under Ron Wolf. And one of Ron Wolf's tenets was always you draft a quarterback every year. You always have someone in the hopper. And that's why when you look through the years at, Mark Brunell or Kurt Warner or some of the other quarterbacks, Matt Hasselbeck, who came through Green Bay, they always had someone there. You don't always take them in the first round, and that's what changes the dynamic. But it makes perfect sense for them to continue to develop a player that, honestly, going back to my notes from, GMs and scouts and coaches a year ago, everyone said Jordan Love is going to be best served if he sits for a year or two. And that's exactly what's happening so far in Green Bay.
It feels like from the outside looking in, Pooh and I have been following the Washington football team for too long. It feels different this year as far as what's coming out of the front office. Like, it felt like there were lots of leaks with the previous administration. Is that how it feels nationally to people that actually get to talk to the movers and shakers?
I don't know about the leaks. That's tough to evaluate since, my business is kind of built on leaks of some kind. I mean, I think that the some of the nonsense that went on under previous regimes has definitely settled down. And that's about, the people that you have in the building. You have Ron Rivera, who really is, that's the man. That's the guy other than Dan Snyder, who's really in charge of everything in that building. You bring in Martin Mayhew and Marty Herney, two veteran executives. You bring in Jason Wright, who's a really sharp guy and is obviously understands public dynamics, the public facing stuff, which is where Washington just has kind of stepped in things, I think, through the years. All those things together, and they've got good people on the public relations side too. They've got a better group in place. And just, I think it's a matter of settling down some of the nonsense. It's not just, it's stuff getting out. It's, you have lawsuits, that have played out on a variety of different fronts. You have the minority owners bailing. Obviously, there were the issues with the cheerleaders all these other things. Those are the things that you have to clean up. I just look at what they've done. If you evaluate them really over the past year and a half, there's not a team that's been more diverse in their hiring, both of minorities as well as women. They've tried to get different voices around that building and certainly around Dan Snyder. I think that all those things help. It's going to come down to what happens as you build this team. They are really kind of doing a ground up rebuild. Obviously, they moved on from Dwayne Haskins, who had been the quarterback drafted just a couple of years ago. We'll see what they do in the draft, potentially a quarterback at some point this year. You bring in Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's a guy you can win with. He's not the long-term solution, but he's a guy that, he shows it every year. He can go out and find ways to make plays. You got some building block pieces like Terry McLaurin and Chase Young. You've got some things in place that should give fans certainly some optimism about how things play out going into coming years.
Tom, I'm interested in your take on where do you see Devonta Smith going in this draft, like with the section of the draft, the first round. People make a lot about his weight, but he is a Heisman winner. He did play in one of the toughest conferences in college football. Do you see him falling out of, past 12, 13, 14, 15, or is it just, one of them, as again, this is near the draft, so it's a lot of talk and you don't really know what's what?
That's definitely true. I will always be the first one to admit that as much information as I try to gather, there's a lot of BS that's also being slung around. And so you take everything with a grain of salt. I wouldn't be surprised if Devonta Smith went as high as 7 to the Lions, a team that needs a wide receiver. You would expect that Jamar Chase is going to be the first receiver off the board, but everybody's going to have, a little bit different evaluations on different players. It would surprise me if Devonta Smith slipped out of the first half of the first round. Teams know. Everybody makes a big deal of what the guy weighed in at pro day, what he weighed in at the combine. Usually teams have a pretty good idea looking at a guy on tape, whether he's a big guy or not a big guy. Devonta Smith is not a huge individual, but neither is, go down the list. Stephon Diggs is not a really, huge guy. Robbie Anderson's not a really huge guy. Tyreek Hill's not a really huge guy. Devonta Smith is a really highly productive player in a pro style offense at Alabama. There's every reason to think that he's going to go and have an opportunity to have success in the NFL. It's just a matter of, where is your fit? It always comes down to, if you look at needs of teams in the draft. Detroit at 7, the Giants at 11 would be another logical team that could be in that mix. Even getting to 15 with the Patriots, even though they did some things in free agency, I think any of those spots would not be a huge surprise to me. And if you were to slide further than that, I would categorize that as a surprise.
You were talking about 7 or 8 there, and I was thinking if Washington made a move up for quarterback and it's somewhere in that 7 to 12 range, how unusual or common is it for teams to trade within the division? Because I was thinking that kind of gets you to your point at like Cowboys, Giants, Eagles are all picking in that same range. Is it unusual for teams within the division to trade that way?
It's rare. It's not unprecedented for teams to trade within the division. The challenge really for Washington to get all the way up from 19 to where you'd probably need to be to get one of these quarterbacks, unless one of them slides, is it's going to cost a lot. If you're talking about going from 19 to 7, I don't have a draft value chart in front of me, but I know that's, multiple, that's a first round pick and a lot more than that. So you're talking about making a significant commitment to try to move up. Also, outside of the top 3 picks, I don't know that there's a lot of teams you look at and say, they're definitely going to draft a quarterback. So if you're a team, let's say it goes like most people think it's going to go. Trevor Lawrence 1 to the Jags, Zach Wilson 2 to the Jets, Mac Jones 3 to San Francisco. Do the Falcons take one at 4? If not, and if they take, let's say, Kyle Pitts, the tight end from Florida, well, you look at those next few spots. Who's going to, who really is going to take a quarterback? The Bengals aren't at 5. The Dolphins, you would not think, at 6. They've been fairly committed, at least publicly, to Tua Tagovailoa at this point. Detroit at 7, it's possible, but they're committed to Jared Goff financially for the next couple of years. Carolina's at 8. They just traded for Sam Darnold. Denver at 9. Can't rule that out. They've got a young guy that they like in Drew Lock, but are they enamored with a Trey Lance or a Justin Fields there? If the quarterbacks start to slide. Okay, now if all of a sudden they get toward 10, 11, 12, now if you're Washington, you're probably looking more than anything at the Patriots sitting there at 15 and saying, okay, if we're going to get one, we may need to get ahead of them. And so you're talking about trading with, I think the Chargers are at 13, the Vikings are at 14, whether one of those teams had moved, the Eagles at 12. Howie Roseman's always open to deal. Those are probably, although again, that's in the division, that's probably the range that you're looking at, trying to make a move up. But then also another dynamic with this draft that probably hasn't been discussed enough. In a normal draft, there's about 20 to 22, what I would call legit first rounders, guys who are going to be first rounders on everyone's board. Even if you're not going to take them, you assume they're going to go. This year, it's like, Scott Fitter, the Panthers GM, said today they got 16 first round grades. There's other teams I've talked to that are at like 17, 18. In other words, the talent level drops off faster than normal in terms of those tier 1, tier 2 types of players, which puts Washington in a tough spot at 19 because there's probably going to be a drop off. Not that you can't get a good football player who can help you, but that clear, these guys are real ones, that drops off sooner than it has in past years. And that's going to mean that, probably picks 17 through about 47 are just going to be pure chaos.
I was going to ask you, I know, the top 3 picks are going to be quarterbacks, and we all have an idea that Mac Jones is going to be that third guy. Do you see Trey Lance possibly slipping into the teens? Because he may have the most upside, but he is the rawest prospect who will need some time. So is there a possibility that he can, unless one of them teams in the teens mortgage, some future assets to get up, can you see him slipping into the teens?
It's possible. I would definitely say it's a possibility. It really just depends, again, what happens up at the top. If you're the Falcons, you can make the argument, well, if it goes Lawrence, Wilson, Mac, we should take Trey Lance at 4. He's not ready to play this year anyway. We're keeping Matt Ryan, so let's stash him for a year. We don't want to be drafted number 4 again, so let's get the guy now. There's certainly that possibility because, coaches in particular have real concerns about Trey Lance's accuracy. A lot of the first exposure, because, especially coaches, scouts are watching these guys for years. Coaches usually, unless you happen to turn on a game on TV, you don't see any of these draft guys until January, February, March before the draft. So for a lot of the coaches, the first tape that they saw was that Central Arkansas showcase game last fall, the only game that North Dakota State played because COVID bumped back their conference schedule to the spring. Trey Lance didn't have a good game. It was probably the worst game he'd played. I think he was 15 of 30 passing. He was inaccurate. He missed throws. Second half, just kind of used his legs, ran around, made some things happen. They won the game. But I had one quarterbacks coach who said to me, I watched that tape and I thought, this is the guy they're talking about. That's the thing that stuck with coaches, is just accuracy is a tough thing to teach. Now, guys like Josh Allen going from Wyoming to Buffalo, to his credit and to the coaching staff of the Bills' credit, he has become more accurate. He's a better passer now. But it certainly can be, can be difficult on that. Plus the level of competition he was going against, the fact that North Dakota State is better than everyone. They're schemed better than everyone. They're more talented than everyone. He's thrown to a lot of wide open dudes. Maybe the craziest stat on Trey Lance is he had only 17 career starts in college, but how many times he threw more than 23 passes in a game? Twice. This is just, they ran the ball and then occasionally pull it and it's play action. That's their offense. So all that worries you, where somebody's going to bet on Trey Lance, and I would bet that he does come off the board before you get to the late teens, is the person. It's the character, the leadership, the intelligence, the want to, the football IQ, all those things are off the charts with Trey Lance. And that's what it's going to come down to. You're not so much betting on the tape, because there's the things you need to see. You're not on that tape. You were betting on the guy, the fact that he's a big guy with a pretty big arm, good athletic ability, and all the intangibles. And you just got to hope this guy is going to be committed to maximize his ceiling. And we're going to be able to get him there, even though he's probably not going to be a guy you want on the field in 2021.
And what about Bond? Did I see? I thought maybe it was you that had said that there's scuttlebutt that he'll pop back into the bottom half of the first round, so I'm going to trade back up. You think that's a likelihood?
It's a long shot possibility with Kellen Mond, but it wouldn't shock me based on the number of people who brought that up unprompted. I didn't hear that about. There's really 3 quarterbacks who are day 2 guys. It's Kyle Trask from Florida, Davis Mills from Stanford, and then Kellen Mond from Texas A&M. Mond was the only one where people brought up the idea, hey, maybe somebody even, with that 5th-year option, you trade up into the first, maybe somebody does it for him. Mond is another guy who he's really smart, comes from a pro style offense. That he knows the game. He's got, a big enough arm. He's got good athletic ability. It checks all those boxes. The issue with him is just everybody refers to him as stiff and robotic. He doesn't look really fluid, which is unusual for a guy who is as good of an athlete as Kellen Mond is. But, you go back through the history, whether you're talking about Jameis Winston or Christian Ponder, EJ Manuel, all those Jimbo Fisher quarterbacks.
You call it the Jimbo Fisher equation.
Yeah,
right?
he teaches stiff elbows in the pocket. So, he teaches kind of this stiff way of playing, but they all perform well. They all do know the game, and he asks a lot for them to run that offense. So the bet on Mond would be somebody goes, okay, this guy can do everything. We can coach that stuff out of him, because he is a good enough athlete. We can teach him to adjust things mechanically here, because everything else, looks pretty good on him. It wouldn't surprise me if any of those guys was the first one off the board on day 2 between Mond, Trask, and Mills. Mond just seems like the one who's the cleanest and maybe, arguably has the most upside of that group too.
We've been talking about quarterbacks. We've talked about some pass catchers. We know there's a few offensive linemen that's definitely going to go high in the draft. When does the first defender come off the board this year?
I mean, that's hold on one second.
Dallas.
Got to hydrate, guys. This is draft talk. This takes a lot out of me. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that's also unique about this draft. I talked about how, the cutoff is 16, 17, 18 real ones, but you can make the case that only about 4 of those guys are defensive players, maybe 5. You got the 2 corners in JC Horn and Patrick Surtain. I would not be surprised if both those guys are off the board in the top 10. Surtain just seems like a natural fit for what Dallas does. And so if somebody else wants to get him, you might have to trade up ahead of the Cowboys. And JC Horn probably, I would think the floor for him is probably 12. They'll both go pretty good. Then it's a matter of, where does Kwity Paye go from Michigan? Defensive end. He could go as high as 11 to the Giants. That wouldn't shock me. Jalen Phillips should come off the board relatively early too. There's some stuff that people have to dig in, but the people at Miami vouch for him. And he's obviously just a freak athlete, had an amazing type of a pro day. And then Micah Parsons is another interesting one from Penn State, just because, there's a lot of things you have to dig into with just kind of the football character with him. But another guy who's a really good athlete. The tape's not consistent, but another one's a good athlete. Those are the 5 guys that I would say safely go in round 1. But that's crazy. 5 defensive guys out of the 32 picks that I could safely say on defense are going to go. That's going to be a really unique aspect of this. I would expect a couple other edge rushers get pushed up, a couple other corners get pushed up. I don't know that any safeties end up getting drafted. I don't know that any defensive tackles end up getting drafted. So yeah, the defensive players will start coming off, I believe, in the top 10 to 12 picks, at least a couple of them. But in the top 20, if you told me at the end of this, there were only 3, 4, or 5 defensive players in the top 20, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
That's crazy.
Tom, I'm curious, does covering the league so closely, does it jade your perspective on enjoying the games? Do you still get to enjoy the sport that you cover so closely?
It's a really good question. You lose the fandom instantly, and I've been doing this for close to 20 years now. So that part goes away really fast. In terms of the enjoyment, it's kind of unique because, I think that fans, for them, the 3 hours on Sunday, like the game is obviously the biggest thing. You might read about your favorite team, check Twitter, get your team alerts, whatever on your phone, hopefully from the NFL app. But you're not as engaged as you are 3 hours on Sunday. For those of us in the industry, and I've talked to people who cover other sports too, it's the same thing. Games are where you get a break. Games are where you're kind of like, okay, all right, settle down. Because, for us at NFL Network, and obviously I have kind of a diverse role, but you're doing so much news all the time. And then you get to, you finally get through Sunday mornings. I'm usually at a game, so I'm on the field, or this past year I'm in the stands doing live hits. You race up to the press box 3 minutes before, you hoon down a hamburger as fast as you can. You sit in your seat. And it's just like, okay, what did I miss? Like, and I'll start going through and just seeing like, what news stories this morning did I miss? Because you're just underwater. I still love, if I'm like on a Thursday night or a Monday night when I'm like back home and I can have a beer and watch. And my wife will always say to me, like, why do you want to watch? This is all you do. I'm like, no, but because this is still the fun part. Like, I just want to I want to turn my brain off and not be going, that guy's due a contract extension. He's playing on a high ankle sprain. That coach did this last week. What's he going to adjust this week? What controversy are we going to have? Like, all that stuff happens then. And then somebody gets hurt and you're just like, well, crap. Now I'm going to be, dealing with this. You feel bad for the player, but you're also like, all right, I got to start calling people about this. But actually sitting down and watching the game, yeah, I still enjoy it. It's just that is absolutely the sigh of relief and like the part that you hope to get to. And then, 3:00, you do one post-game interview, you get in your rental car, you floor it to the airport under the speed limit, of course, you get on the airplane, you have one beer, you get home, you're half groggy, Sunday Night Football's on, then you go right back to the news on Monday morning. That's kind of the endless cycle. Draft is a little bit different. It's another push here, but May to July, that's really the sweet spot for those of us who cover the league. You got OTAs and mini camps and holdouts and contracts and all that, but that's a pretty good time of year.
I was going to ask you, what is your typical draft weekend? Was draft starts on Thursday now, extended weekend. What is your typical draft weekend like? Like, we see obviously when the draft is going on, you're honed in, but what is your typical draft weekend process like?
Well, the past several years I've been, or at least 2017 to 2019, I was with a team. I think I was actually with the Dolphins every year, which there are worse places to go than South Florida, though. It gets a little sticky down there this year. Normally I'd be flying around, somewhere in the first round, somewhere in the second round, somewhere on day 3, interview the players as they show up. Last year was obviously different because of COVID. This year is going to be different too. I'll be on Good Morning Football every morning through the course of the week, starting on Monday all the way through Saturday. So doing news, in terms of the actual draft, I'll be watching it like everyone else. And I'll be, texting people with teams and asking about picks and asking what's going on in trades and all that type of stuff. But to a degree, you do kind of become at least in my position, a consumer. We'll have people on site. Ian Rappaport will be doing live hits during the broadcast. But for me, I'm just trying to figure out, where the pieces go. I'm going down my mock draft or my list of the first round, figuring out how much I got right. And then, figuring out what the storylines are going to be, especially when people slide and why are they sliding and who's going to stop the slide. I'm kind of watching it like everyone else. I'm just have a little bit more active role.
Well, what is your best guess a week and a day out for what you think Washington will do at 19?
It's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of different, you can make a lot of arguments. I mean, if a quarterback falls in their lap, I think that there's certainly a possibility that it could be that. The linebacker from Notre Dame, Owusu Korokoa, would be one name that I think would be a natural fit. They need linebacker help. He's kind of a lighter linebacker. He can really run. Didn't run a 40 at his pro day, but a guy who can move. That would be one name that would jump out just, kind of off the top of my head. And then, obviously you still could continue to add weapons offensively. I know that they've been doing that, but, if they felt like there was value on another receiver, 19 might be a little bit rich in terms of that next group of wide receivers. But even that, wouldn't entirely shock me. Running back wise, Antonio Gibson's, probably the guy. I wouldn't think that they would go that direction, but that's about where the running backs potentially might begin to go. You can never have enough offensive linemen either. So a lot of opportunities. I mean, that's kind of the good and the bad of when you're in year 2 of kind of building the thing and you have a new GM this year is you got a lot of spots to fill, but at least that means there's a good chance that the best player available is going to match up with one of your needs on draft day.
Tom, we thank you for joining us. We don't want to take up too much of your time. We know you have a lot of things to do with draft week coming up. Just let the people know where they can find you. We obviously know what you have coming up next.
Yeah, I mean, it's on Twitter at Tom Pelissaro. That's probably the best spot to find me. Obviously, I'm on, Instagram and Facebook and God knows what else they signed me up for. But Twitter is kind of the clearinghouse. Everything else, if I updated, it's because I realized I haven't done anything in a week. So, and on NFL Network all next week, starting Monday. So it'll be 7 a.m. to it's actually an extended show, 4 hours. So 7 a.m. I think to 11 a.m. Eastern live surrounding the draft. Starting on Monday, I'll be on that show throughout the week. It should be fun.
Thank you once
Tom, we
again.
appreciate it.
You got it, guys.
Yeah, man.
Have a good one.
You too. See ya.
Thanks, bud. I appreciate it a lot.
You got it. Yep.